Step 2 of an outbound closing process is the discovery call. You've already sent your 3-step message sequence to the prospect, and so now you're going to dive into that initial call. The first and most important thing about a successful discovery call with an outbound lead is that you have to own the call. That means at the beginning of the call, you're going to take charge and set the frame. Those first 2 minutes of discovery call are extremely important. First, what you're going to do is build rapport. Look up the prospect, find something to comment on, something to chit chat on. It might be their location. It might be something you saw about them online. But start with something to build some simple chit chat and rapport for about 60 seconds. Then you quickly want to move into setting the frame for the call. And this is really important because if you let that lead take charge on the call, you're going to be in a horrible position. So what I typically do to take charge at the beginning of a call is to really set the frame. After you build that rapport, I'm going to come in and I'm going to say, on these calls, what we typically like to do is really first understand a bit more about your business. And then I can share a bit more about what we do at a high level and really if we think we could help. And the whole real goal of this is to understand is this a fit and does it make sense to have more calls in the future. And so when you set that simple frame on the front end of a call, you're really taking charge. You're letting yourself get information from the prospect first so you can really qualify or disqualify them. And you're framing this in a way that's useful to the prospect. Because by them sharing information, you're going to be able to understand if you're actually a good fit to help them. Occasionally, you may have a hard-headed person who says, well, no, I want to hear what you do first. And that may occasionally happen. In those cases, what I'll typically do is say, sure, I'm happy to give a quick high-level overview, but as I mentioned, it'll really help me to understand a bit more about your company, just so that I can understand if we're even a fit and if we can help you. And then I'll give a quick high-level overview, maybe 60 seconds to 2 minutes, and then I'll ask them a question, and I'll start diving into the discovery questions. So once you've got to the point where you're starting to ask the customer discovery questions, then you really want to start to get intentional and very thoughtful about these. One of my favorite reading resources to figure out how to ask good discovery questions is the book Spin Selling. In the text associated with this video, you'll even find a link to an article that I wrote that does a quick summary of spin selling and gives you the 80-20 highlights. But if you don't have time to read in, here are a few of my favorite questions to start with. I always love to start off with, so I've looked a bit more about your business and I understand XYZ from what I see online, but it's always helpful to understand a bit more about you, where you're at, and can you just kind of give me a high-level overview of your business? The way that question is framed is really important because you want to show that you've done your research and your due diligence and actually looked into this prospect. You don't want to appear like you haven't actually looked at their website or done any research into them. But often a person's online presence is not really reflective of the core of their business. In so many cases, it can be out of date or you don't know what the real focus is for them at that moment. When you ask for a high-level overview, you often get completely different responses than what you anticipated. Second, I like to dive into questions understanding who their target customer is. What is the type of company that they're typically working with and who are the decision makers? Third, I like to ask the question of what has you interested in X right now? For my content agency, that is often, what has you interested in, diving into content right now? When you start to understand someone's interest and reason for taking the call, that helps you get closer to understanding the pain points. And one of my favorite questions is, what does success look like for you in 6, 12, 24 months from now with this? That simple question will give you amazing insights into what someone really wants and desires. Now, often I'll ask quite a few more questions, and these questions might be specific to my type of business, but those are a few high-level overview questions that I often turn to. And then the next question is extremely, extremely important. I like to say, now, this is all super helpful. Is there anything else that would be helpful for me to know before I dive in and share a bit more about what we do? And this question is really important because most times, there's something else. There's something else on their mind. There's some new initiative. There's something that they haven't shared with you about their business. And this "is there anything else" question is really powerful. And here's the thing. If they do answer this question and there is something else, then you want to ask it again. Is there anything else I should know, or should I share a bit more about what we do and how we could help? This is a super powerful question, and I'll sometimes ask this 2, 3, sometimes even 4 times on a call because there's more that a prospect has to share. But at some point they'll say, I think that's about it. Would love to hear more about what you guys are doing. And at that point, they have given you permission to go into talking about yourself and your company. Now, once we have permission, what we immediately dive into is going into a value drop. And so in some level or form, based off of what you heard, you want to share some thought or insight or piece of advice or value or recommendation to that prospect so that they immediately feel like they're getting value from you on this call. Most often, whenever I am going through and I'm asking them questions, while taking notes, I'm bolding things or I'm putting asterisks next to something that I want to immediately share with them as soon as they turn the conversation back around to me. This value drop is again another way to build trust and show you're giving value to that prospect on the front end. So with that, again, we're giving value, we're going to provide some basic recommendations, and then I like to ask a question, does that make sense? And I can share a bit more about how it is we actually work. And so once again, you're asking for permission for them to enable you to actually go ahead and sell. At this point, what I like to do is give a quick high-level overview of what we do, but I'll often frame it in a way of, well, this is really helpful, but we often do kind of tailor or product or service to individual customers' needs. So I'll share what we do at a high level, but would love to have another call where I can take some time, digest this, and think through a specific plan of action for you. And on this point, I will give them a very high-level overview of what it is we do, how we work, the general service, and maybe some thoughts and direction. At this point, I'll also give a rough budget range for them. So we may say, oh, our services are typically costing between 2 to 10 grand a month. What I like to do is give what's the minimum inside of where you won't take anyone lower than that. And then I like to aim high on the high end, higher than what you may even be thinking right now for this prospect, just because you never quite know. Sometimes prospects have more budget for something than you initially expect. And when you give that rough budget range, often what comes back is a customer saying, oh, well, I think we'd be in roughly this range. So if you could design something that is fitting within this range, that would be super helpful. Or a prospect may say, oh, that's definitely just probably out of our range. I don't think we could do this. And that's great because you disqualify them before spending your time on a second call. But by giving this high-level overview, not really giving deep specifics, and setting up a frame for a second call with them where you're going to custom tailor a solution for them is an extremely powerful way to build trust and give you more touch points over time. Now, the last thing I do on this discovery call is I'm going to set a time for a next call. While we're there on the phone with them, I am going to get them scheduled for that next time. If they don't do that, then I'll make sure that there's a clear expectation of setting it, or sometimes they need to loop in another person, another decision maker on the call. And that's a great thing, so you may schedule asynchronously. But often we'll try to tentatively at least get a time on the books to reconnect anywhere from 4 days out to a week or 2 out, depending on the size of the company and the buying cycle. But a key important part of outbound sales is to always have that next call on the books. So here's what you've accomplished on that initial discovery call. First, you've built rapport with the prospect. That's step number 1. Second, you've set the framed and owned the conversation and guided the conversation. Third, you've asked them discovery questions to learn more, understand about their needs. Fourth, you've dropped value on the prospect, making it the call worth their time even if they don't hire you. Fifth, you gave a high-level overview of your service, and then you gave them a budget range to help disqualify them or help to get some information around what budget they might be looking to spend. And finally, you are setting a time for a next call so that there are clear next steps between now and then, and you've got a time on their calendar to keep this sales process moving forward. So that's how you hold a successful discovery call with an outbound lead.